Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Tracy Cook, and I'm the online media manager for ModernAnalyst.com, the premier community for business analysts. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Why Your BA Toolkit Should Include Decision Modeling. Today's webinar will last approximately 60 minutes, including the question and answer section at the end. Please be sure to submit your questions in advance using the questions feature of the GoToWebinar software. I'd like to say thank you to Sapiens Decisions for sponsoring today's event. And with that, I'll pass it off to Mark Zilaukas for opening remarks.
Thanks, Tracy. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Mark Zilaukas from Sapiens Decision, and I'm very excited that so many people are joining for today's session. We were just in Las Vegas last week at the BBC conference and had hundreds of conversations with business analysts, really across all industries. And we know that today's topic is more timely than ever. Business analysts sit between policy and implementation, from strategy to execution. Your success relies on the ability to help business discover and define the requirements and express them in ways that IT can implement. A big chunk of that work lies in the domain of business rules, and we'll refer to it as decision management and decision automation. Managing business rules and requirements can be a minefield when applying traditional methods, and that's why I'm excited to introduce your moderator, my colleague, Justin Patterson. Justin is a practitioner with deep experience in helping business analysts and organizations in their journey with decision modeling. And Justin is a sales engineer at Sapiens Decision, a leading market provider of decision modeling software and services. He spent over 10 years in practicing decision modeling in organizations across industry. Justin has led decision modeling teams at a mid-sized mortgage firm. And at Sapiens Decision, he's held numerous roles, including decision architect, practice manager, and now sales engineer. So Justin, welcome. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Mark. I'm doing well. This is exciting. Tremendous audience we have here today to talk about this important topic for business analysts and their organizations. The topic, of course, is decision modeling. And for those in the audience that it may be a new topic, what we're talking about is managing your business logic through a visual means that we call the decision model. And when I talk about the business logic, I'm talking about businesses' procedures, their guidelines, anything that's a checklist, anything people are having to figure out a lot of times manually, or it might just be code embedded in applications. All of this is logic. All of this is what makes your business your business. And what we're going to discuss today is how we can manage that logic through decision modeling. So I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists. Collectively, we have something north of, I think, 40 years of decision modeling experience. With me today, I have Stacey Hurst. Stacey's a risk analyst, consultant manager at Wells Fargo, working in the enterprise finance division. And she's been leveraging decision modeling for the last few years. Welcome, Stacey. We also have Ryan Seaman. He leads the decision management team at US Bank and has been modeling for 5 years. Welcome, Ryan. In addition, we have Kristen Popp at Freddie Mac. She is the business rules tech lead senior with 12 years decision modeling experience. I think that might be more than I have. And finally, Megan Jurgensen is the Senior Director of Business Rules for HomePoint. She's part of the transformation umbrella, and she's been modeling for many years. So thank you all for being here. As far as the agenda today, what we plan on doing is we'll have a few polling questions that we'll ask for audience kind of participation as we go. We'll also have questions for our panelists, and we'll save time at the end to actually receive questions from the audience that we can ask of the panelists. So if that sounds good for everyone, I think we'll start it off with our first polling question. So if you had just one wish to make an improvement in the way business rules are managed, what would it be? I wish I could make changes to rules faster. Perhaps you're looking for complete and more accurate documentation. Maybe you've got the need to more easily verify accurate data. The other thing we kind of hear about is using or driving more process automation, or maybe just improving that relationship between the business and IT. So I'm watching as the answers come in here. We'll give 30 seconds or so to accumulate our answers. So far, having more complete, accurate documentation seems to be winning out with driving process automation as a close second. All right, so yeah, here are the results from our quick poll. Complete and accurate documentation. That is interesting. I would have lost the bet. But all right, yeah, I think what we'll find is our panelists will be able to key in on some of these pain points here and their own experiences, and then some of the stories that we're about to share through our questions. So I think that gets started, and we can kind of go to our first question that I call the matrix question. So I've got a bunch of kind of ridiculous little anecdotes and stories. One of them is my matrix analogy, and that typically what I see is clients start to use decision modeling to solve a particular use case. But what happens, hopefully quickly, is they realize that decision modeling is a capability and it can solve all kinds of use cases. And pretty soon, all we see are the opportunities to use decision modeling. And that's when I say the client is in the matrix, because all they see is how it can be used. So with that as kind of our question, how are use cases evolved with the adoption of decision modeling? Kristen, I think I'll ask you, how is that happening at Freddie Mac?
Sure thing. Welcome, everybody. You're right. That was actually what happened at Freddie Mac. We had a scenario where we were mandated to change the input data, and we realized that all of our existing rules weren't going to work with the new input data structure, and we had a decision point about what we were going to do. So we started decision modeling, and it was all about whether or not Freddie Mac is going to buy these loans. It was very much a pilot. We learned a lot from that experience, and halfway through that project, there was already a new spec and a new need to already start updating those rules. And there were other areas saying, hey, we'd like to do that too. And over the last 10 years, we've seen some groups come seeking out using decision modeling. We can talk later. We've had a few people that we would call hostages that were told to use it given the wins we've had, but we have definitely evolved into finding lots of ways to apply decision modeling to help us get a handle of our policies and making sure we're managing our business decisions.
I'm going to have more questions about the wins in particular, but Ryan, anything you can kind of share from the U.S. Bank's perspective?
Yeah, one of the earliest use cases we had at U.S. Bank with decision modeling was just going through old legacy code, code that was very difficult to decipher, and recreating it with decision modeling. By doing that, we were able to get a lot more clarity into the business rules, sort of how they worked together. We were able to then, test the business rules recreated and share with our partners the gaps that we were finding in their legacy code. So we were able to actually share with them the types of outcomes they should be expecting instead. And that was one of the ways to sort of get the buy-in from some of our partners to start to leverage decision modeling.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, I know we've got some conversation. Hopefully we can talk more about the buy-in. That's always an interesting part. Megan, from HomePoint's perspective, I think their kind of understanding of decision modeling was slightly kind of different, if I recall. Can you expand on that?
Yes, so we were unique in the sense that many of our technology leaders had experience using decision modeling and had a clear vision when we created my team and how it wanted to be used. So in tandem with our BPM application, we were looking to support workflow, our task guidance, and quality control. But we had this immediate need for helping to create our redisclosure queue. So at the time, our company had users manually submitting change requests based on what changed with the loan. And there wasn't anything that automatically detected changes. So what we used decision modeling for was capturing those data points that we knew could require redisclosure and creating rules to determine if a loan needed to be reviewed by a user. So just automating that process altogether and helping to avoid issues that we had with the manual process that we had in place at the time.
So you had the process automation plus the workflow kind of orchestration. All right, just get my head around,
Yes.
fitting my theme of my matrix here. I like it. Stacy, how about Wells Fargo? How did their decision modeling kind of use cases evolve?
Yeah, our use case evolved based on growing complexity of our business needs and our technology's challenges to keep up with our change pace. So our use case was, how can we apply decision modeling to keep up with business logic and business strategy changes to drive our directive to the balance sheet. Are we selling you? Are we holding you? That sort of thing. We quickly were able, and this is years upon years of legacy SQL and ETL code layered on top of each other. It was just horribly difficult to manage. We were able to translate that into a decision model, and then quickly expanded the use case past that. We started with, I think, 2 distinct decision use cases, and we've now expanded to, I think we're up to 13.
What's driving what's the primary driver of the expansion? I mean, 2 to 13 sounds like pretty good growth.
The need for keeping up with change, right? So unlike, I guess, the needs of folks on this call to have change documentation as an important thing, our group needed rapid change, not in lieu of documentation, but in spite of whatever that change management requirements were, right? So this allows us to maintain our SDLC structures and requirements, but managing that change within a small group with the decision model, but still maintaining the disciplines of change management.
Very nice, thank you. And I think that kind of takes us to our next question. Stacy, I'm gonna stay with you for a moment. When we talk about managing, question 2, if we could, or the next slide. When we talk about, you said a small group managing the requirements, have the roles and/or the responsibilities of that group changed as these use cases have come across?
Absolutely. So my team used to be primarily responsible for understanding what changes needed to be done, educating technology on the business need, the various different changes that are required, literally like walking them through those requirements and making sure they understood the intent and all this other stuff. We were a very SQL-based group at that time, so we were basically giving them SQL as our business requirement without really any relaying of intent, et cetera. That shifted to us working directly with the business on what their intended changes were, working through the requirements pretty much on the fly, and really allowing the business to own our destiny in regards to the data that they need to drive their business.
Very interesting. Megan, did you see anything similar at HomePoint?
So here at HomePoint, it was interesting because we hired people with the intent of being decision modelers, our business analysts. So what we found seemed to be the best formula for success was actually bringing people from the business on to be decision modelers or business analysts, and that were more logically inclined. So having that business background just was an easy transition into the decision modeling. And really, with our collaboration with the business and being able to visually show them what we were building out for them as far as our business policy, our testing was just a matter of really checking to see if our connections were good to go. Once we deployed our rules, it was very simple to create a team and get us going.
Thank you, Megan. What about over at Freddie Mac? Was there a specific role, or did you kind of?
Great question. So when we started off, before we did decision modeling, we had what I would consider a small group of folks that did change management. that were the bridge. They'd go talk to the policy owners, and the policy owners would talk in business terms, and then they'd try to translate the business terms into technical system speak and give it to the 2 or 3 developers. When we started doing decision modeling, given that I had a testing background, I instantly saw the synergies there. And I would say we've evolved. We are now a hybrid team. We're kind of like peanut butter and jelly. We are a half technical team and half business analysts. We're still that bridge, but we've had a lot of people in the policy area come and learn decision modeling and even get certified in it. And they are now very comfortable reading it. We've had people leave our department and move into the policy areas, so they're well versed. We've got technical team members that are learning how to model. We even have some of our traditional business analysts trying to learn how to generate code. So we are much more, I guess, a broad set of skills that come together to try to translate the policy into that decision model and then get it implemented pretty quickly. And we've got folks now that can play all of those roles. They can talk to the business area and use the decision model to identify the requirements, use the decision model to identify the test scenarios, and then do the testing and show the results to the business partners. And so we've got modelers all over Freddie Mac, or people with experience. And once they get over that initial hurdle, they tend to find it really helpful as a way to communicate what the policy is. And it's helped us standardize how we think of business rules.
If you wouldn't, or anyone on the panel wouldn't mind, I see there's a couple questions just around the context of a specific decision, or what is a decision. Kristen, perhaps you can kind of just share a couple examples of a decision model. Same for everyone else. I'm just interested again in exploring what that matrix of things we can solve with decision modeling is.
So the nice thing about decision modeling is it's completely flexible. What we like to tell our partners when we partner them is we're going to make a decision at the level that it makes sense to you. So I'm going to use an analogy that many people might be familiar with is you might decide what we're building is the decision whether or not we're going to accept applicants to our school. And the final answer is you're going to accept your wait list or you're rejected from our school. So you could design it that you've got one big, huge decision, or you can break it up into manageable chunks and say, we're going to make a decision about your academic eligibility, make a decision about your extracurricular, and maybe another, and you can break it up into chunks. And really what it is it's about how you want to manage it. So if you think of the admittance as one set of questions and financial aid as a separate, you break it up. But it's up to the business partners to figure out what's that right mix. What we typically do is look at our source documentation and ask them, how do you think about it? And then say, do you want to manage your loan to value, your LTV, along with your total LTV, or do you want to break that up and manage it separately? And then we experiment. We try it broken up, and if it works, we stick with it. If we realize later we need to combine it, we do that. So.
Thank you. Stacy, what's happening at Wells Fargo in terms of the role development?
I think there's it's been a shift primarily of just being able to really support the pace of business change. We've driven historically requirements and testing. Now we're actually solving the problem for the business. We're able to troubleshoot with them on the fly. Having that testing capability within the model itself has really been something to expedite exceptions, right? Because the devil's in the details anytime you do anything. But I do think, just to kind of dovetail off of what Kristen said, having that ability to not just see the final answer, but the components of how it was determined has a real power to the business that they didn't realize the power of that insight until they realized they had it with these conclusions that come out of these various different stages of your decision modeling. Whereas before it was just embedded in the final answer, and you had to run separate queries or separate reporting or whatever to identify how it got there. The decision models really do help you build the building blocks to help the business, support how they got there, right? Not that they got there, but how they got there. But really integrating, the testing and the requirements and the build all as one, and being able to just solve the problem quickly on the fly, end to end, has just really been a big part of the success story of our journey.
It's interesting. I think everyone has mentioned testing as part of this role. Ryan, if at US Bank they're also doing testing, was that part of the role initially, or is the role kind of expanded to include testing because that's what decision modeling can kind of aid in?
Yeah, I would say that the role of testing has evolved within our organization, as initially we perceived it as the decision analyst would have the opportunity to test it prior to deploying the code. But the more that we bring additional partners in as business analysts, the more we're getting them involved in the testing. They're able to pick up on nuances that decision analysts with maybe less mortgage experience is unable to hone in on, and they're able to provide real-time feedback for us to go in and maybe make tweaks to either the rules or the messages that our end users are receiving to ensure that they get the best experience possible.
Great, fantastic answers. I appreciate that from everyone. Let's move to the next question. So how does decision modeling make it obvious? Which doesn't seem like a very kind of well thought question, so I'll share my story behind it. I used to work with my friend Becky, who was a head of risk management at Mortgage, and Becky handed me guidelines for a PDF of guidelines she wanted to change so that I could read through them so I knew how to build my decision model. And the guideline says effective June 1st, here's the new requirements, here's the new guidelines. And I said to Becky, how do I know what June 1st is? Is that for all the loans that are in pipeline as of June 1st? Is it for every new application on or after June 1st? What about loans that are locked but don't have an actual application date? How do you want me to handle those? And she looked at me and she said, why do you make this so difficult, Justin? And I'll never forget that. But really, I couldn't build the decision model without having this information. And I wasn't trying to make it difficult for Becky. All of our logic had these kind of requirements that we knew the trigger points to turn them on and off within our decision models, because decision modeling made it obvious for me to understand when the logic went into effect. So with that as the context, Ryan, we'll start with you. How is decision modeling making it obvious at US Bank?
Yeah, I think just to keep going on, the testing, being able to read, business-friendly values, to be able to see all of the possibilities within a decision model can help, helped our team, identify, okay, you told us in this certain situation you were expecting, blank for an outcome. We didn't get that, so, either there's something wrong with the way we're implementing your policy, or there's, a different way that this needs to be built.
Thank you, Ryan. Stacy, is decision modeling making it obvious at Wells Fargo?
I think it highlights how not obvious it is. Coming from a SQL, we were very much SQL driven in our development and our validations and our requirements gathering. People knew their business rules, right? But it never really spoke to the intent, right? So I think people can, very easily make a statement like effective date in your example, without really understanding there's 15 different options of what effective date can be driven off of. What do you do with exceptions? What do you do with if the sky is blue or it's raining? What do you do with red shutters versus blue shutters? It's not defined in your intent, so what do you want to do with those exceptions and breakouts, right? So really making sure that people, and it's really helped people think about what they need in a different context. It's made them look at things in a, what am I really trying to accomplish goal setting, as opposed to how do I want to solve it, right? It's making them move to the what do I need, not how do I need to solve for it. And that has huge power in and of itself, because it does, add to data quality, data intent, and all of the other, governance type of items that come into play when you're part of a big bank, right? So, sorry, I probably went off topic.
No, that's great. You said data quality, and Kristen, if I recall, that's something that Freddie Mac is taking advantage of.
Yeah. So, we started off with a lot of policy that was eligibility, but we have moved into doing calculations, checking for completeness and reasonableness of data. And it's funny, when we start off with decision modeling, one of the things that is challenging for folks is they want things to be efficient, especially if they've come from a technical background. And their first reaction is, why do I have to cover all the scenarios? And they're like, I told you everything that's allowed. The opposite is not. And what's amazing is once you start modeling, they start to see all the complexities of, you may have told me that if the light is green, I can go, but you've also told me if there's a person in the intersection, don't. What happens when I have a person in the intersection and the light is green? What am I supposed to do? So we've had some real examples of that around, there was a policy where they said, hey, we want the loans to be between this LTV ratio. And that seemed obvious. And then they said we were going to parameterize that, and we started throwing out exceptions. Well, what happens if there's only a min and there's no maximum? What happens if there's a max but no min, right? And we got through all the modeling. I was so proud of myself. And then I was like, let me just test it out. And it had never occurred to me. What if somebody flipped the min and max? What if somebody said, right, what's going to happen in that situation? So thinking through all those exceptions, scenarios is helpful when you do it in requirements mode rather than in production. And I could tell you war stories of people swearing up and down on a stack of Bibles that the data will never come in this way. You go live day one, oh my gosh, there's emergency. Guess what? The users did exactly what everybody said would never happen. And now you've got hundreds of loans failing, and what are you going to do? So we have learned the hard way to think through all the things that are never going to happen and cover it anyway. And I think it's great that decision modeling forces you to say both positive and really make sure you know what you're saying. And once people see the value, they stop asking, do I really have to do, all scenarios?
That would be near verbatim of the experiences I've had, especially in the that'll never happen. I've also heard if that happens, play the lottery. And
Yes.
Sure enough, it happened.
Yes.
Megan, how does this happen over at Home Point?
Yeah, so the example that comes to mind for me is we had multiple channels of business that we had written rules for to support their policies and the variations between them. And after establishing most of our rules, our company was looking to add a sub-channel to one of our channels, and that had its own variations in policy, and are also just told, it follows X channels policy for the most part. Well, that sub-channel also had two paths within it, and we found the documentation that the business had provided and the policies, it was unclear in cases what paths or policies should be enforced for this new sub-channel. And by putting it into decision, it was very obvious, where there were gaps in the documentation. We could visually pull up and show the business, hey, your documentation says this, but you can see there's a conflict with what you're saying versus what would actually happen if we put this into place, and gaps as well. So it really highlighted unclear guidance in documentation and just issues that they hadn't foreseen with, for themselves, and made them go back and talk to, their people in their areas to figure out what is it that we're wanting to do with these channels, and really made them see the issues that they were going to have had we not had the rules in place to really enforce what it is that they were trying to accomplish.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, you mentioned documentation that came up at the conference Mark and I were at, where just the effort involved, or shall I say chaos was the word that was used at the conference, and maintaining all the requirements document, it's too much. But when we can put it in decision models organized in a repository with links back to the supporting documents, all of a sudden now we've got an easier way to see it, and manage it.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate all the questions there. I think that takes us to our second polling question. So we've talked about a few of these so far, perhaps even all of them, but what specific use case is most interesting to you? Back to our audience here. The scales are moving quickly, but at the moment, requirement documentation is the one that seems to be leading. We'll give just a bit longer here. Nearly 60% of the audience has voted, so I appreciate the interaction. Requirement documentation and workflow orchestration. They're both positive, very solid use cases for decision modeling, but not to overstate the data acceptance, which is, from my experience, one that is frequently overlooked but tremendously valuable. And then everything about decision modeling supports automating task review and data transformation. It's kind of an interesting one. If you can have your variables come in as any number of things, but you want to standardize them or just modify them for use in your logic, that's where the decision modeling can help out there. Appreciate all the feedback there. All right, so let's go to the next question for our panelists. So far it all sounds great. There has to have been a challenge. So Megan, we'll start with you. What's been that greatest challenge in driving adoption of decision modeling?
So we had a really large appetite for rules, so there wasn't much of the challenge of adopting it as far as our leadership goes. But what we found as a challenge was having IT be able to keep up with our needs in some cases. So internally, we had a lot of autonomy with our rules that we created for our associates. But we also used rules for our customer portal, and that team was the one that really controlled what data was available to us. And so the challenge we faced was our internal rules could keep up at a faster pace with the business needs than what we could accomplish with our portal. And so the beauty of decision modeling was we were able to have different variations of our rules to be able to manage both of those, but it did prove challenging just to really remember, what was different between the two and the reasoning why.
Interesting. Ryan, how about at US Bank? Greatest challenge there?
Yeah, I would say the variance in just how much buy-in you get from group to group. We find that the more exposure our partners have had with decision modeling, the more on board they are. At first, we had a difficult time getting our technology partners to buy in. In recent times, we've actually found they want decision modeling to be a solution to everything. Sometimes we have to tighten the reins a little bit when it's more of like a forecasting or a regression analysis that they just think, oh, it's simple, Sapiens can do it, and we've had to push back saying, no, we'd love to, but that needs to sit elsewhere. We want to manage the rules, that type of thing. So I'd just say, just the extremes of time from one end to the other.
Interesting. Stacy, I think you had a different perspective.
Yeah, I think our IT was on board right away. I think our biggest challenge was infrastructure, setting up the functionalities of the request and the response and all of the data exchanges, et cetera. I think understanding what needs to trigger, how things need to flow back and forth. When we started this all up, we had a agreed upon process of how the SLA for adding data and some of that stuff. So some of our lessons learned were from prior changes in tools. And we applied it to this migration to using decision modeling. But yeah, our biggest challenge was just getting the infrastructure set up, and that took us, a good 9 to 12 months to get it all working end to end. Not necessarily the rules up and running, but just talking to our various databases and storing that end result for end user consumption and reporting.
Thanks, Stacy. Kristen, anything you'd point out as a big challenge?
For us, it was actually the business area. And it goes back to one of your earlier questions. And actually what the group keeps saying is documentation of requirements. We partnered with IT early, so they were on board with it from an approach and a technology. What we find is we've had several cases where we've had hostages, where they've been told, use this, and they're like, I like my way, I can do it fast, and they think we're going to slow them down. And the good news is at the end, we've converted them all, and now they're all like, we can't believe we didn't do this. But we would have groups that were like, we like this, we're able to do this stuff really quick. And then when we start pointing out, and there would be a new policy, as a lot of the folks have said, it's really hard to go back and look at the documentation. And they'd tell you, this is the rule. And then somebody would go test it in an environment, and the rules wouldn't behave in a UAT or test environment at all like what they thought the policy was. And then somebody would start playing with it in production, and they're like, I don't know what the policy actually is. They couldn't figure it out. There was too many ifs and loops, and they couldn't find it, and their documentation didn't actually match the code. When we started doing decision modeling, the gap between the code and our decision models basically went away, and it was much faster and easier. And now we've got folks on the business that come into our tool to say, let me look at the decision model so I know what the policy is. And we've converted those groups that thought they would never see the value. And I think it was also hard for some of the policy owners to deal with those questions, right? You say you want X, you say you want Y, what happens when X and Y are both true? A lot of times they want to dismiss that, and so it's hard for them to take ownership of, I really have to cover all those scenarios. But we've turned a lot of groups around that they see that not only is there better documentation of their requirements, and they can explain it to our regulators or to auditors, but it's actually faster because it's well documented. And so we get both. We get speed to market as well as very good documentation about what the actual policy is.
I don't know how I could have, but I almost forgot about the auditor perspective. But I was definitely in a chair once when someone said, what are the rules? And it was nice to be able to physically show the auditor, these are the rules. It kind of takes us to the next question here in terms of it's all great, but can you prove it? So have there been metrics that we can point back to that we can say this has improved because of decision modeling? And Megan, I think you have a story as it relates to that.
Yeah, so it kind of touches on what Kristen was just saying with a hostage story. So where our rules were invoked and used by our internal users was within this BPM application I mentioned, and there was a lot of resistance to using that system and feeling like our rules would slow them down in the sense that they would have to actually, address and correct the issues before they were able to move on with their process. And once we were able to get 100% adoption of the BPM application and using our rules, over the course of a quarter, we saw our pre-fund defect rate go from about 11.5% to approximately 3% with no other changes other than using this system with our rules. So it really made a tremendous difference in what we saw as far as quality.
I should probably know what I don't. How is that? I imagine it translates to real dollars. Is that a big impact? Was it noticeable?
Yes, it was noticeable. And to touch on earlier, with the redisclosure queue I mentioned, as well as our first area where we used rules, we were quite literally paying the price there because we were missing through that manual process, people triggering a change for redisclosure. So things were going through the system, never being disclosed, and that cost cannot be passed on to the borrower, and we were eating those. And with the use of our rules, we were able to save a significant portion of money in those cost to cures for things that just were sneaking through the cracks from human error.
Thanks, Megan. I should point out that while, however it happened, all of us are from mortgage. Decision modeling can be applied to any industry, any use case. You're evaluating data to derive an outcome. That's what we're doing. Here we just happen to be using it largely for mortgage. But anyway, back to the metrics perspective. Stacy, I think you had a positive experience too in terms of matrices.
Yeah, so we had a lot of budgetary changes that were really forcing a strict prioritization of things that had to be done that our technology folks would do. So the business needs for rules changes or strategy changes or whatnot always kind of fell to the bottom of the list. So this actually has allowed us to return change to our business within a 72-hour SLA, and that's from requirement test through to deployment. We have a 72-hour turn time for our folks, and we have been able to support that with at least 7 new initiatives over the last 2 months. So it's a very, very effective way of managing change quickly and controlled for the business, and they are ecstatic, right? Being able to have consistent results that can be shared across groups. There's not replication of work, et cetera. So it's very efficient, and it allows people to have trust in the data, which is pretty much a cuss word when you talk about data usage in a finance department. It's nobody trusts anybody. But it does allow that trust to elevate because they understand how it's working.
So if I'm understanding, you're taking on more and new initiatives, and you're able to deliver within 72 hours. Paint a bigger picture of the before kind of state, if that's your current state.
People stopped asking for things because they took so long. Literally, they would go without, or they would find manual workarounds around it. They had, business processes and, access databases and all kinds of stuff to do the things that they needed to do, replicated across 6 different groups because every group had to deal with the same issue because the data wasn't resident in one place. There was no place to put the data on platform. So when we were able to install, this decision modeling and the infrastructure around it to consistently pass those results, those results can be shared across the entire user base, and that had huge impacts on efficiency, morale, usability, consistency. It made auditors happy, right? Because we're no longer having all of these manual processes that people are having to do to maintenance their things because our technology.
That's been my experience too, is that the business will find a way, whether it's Excel, Access, SharePoint. They have problems that need to be solved, and to think that they can solve them with decision modeling's help in a 72-hour window gives them a real opportunity there. Kristen, if you wouldn't mind kind of speaking to any metrics you may have.
Sure. Yeah, sure. We also have good metrics on improving the speed to market. We've got story after story of one group used to do quarterly releases. They were not sure they wanted to do decision modeling, and we started spitting out rule changes in a week. We even parameterized some of the rules so that they can customize those policies real time, that allows them to do deals and bring in lots of new business. So we've got lots of metrics on improving speed to market, but the other place we've evolved that's slightly maybe different than other groups is we've embedded in our rules not just, hey, are you eligible or ineligible, but when you're not, what's the reason? And we have developed a feedback loop where our analytics group can look at the loans that are failing, and they can use that to then inform their policy or to inform customers. And so they're now looking at things like, hey, it's taking this seller or this servicer this many attempts to pass our rules, what's going on? And we can try to reduce our processing time as well as our clients. They can use it to feedback, hey, here's policy. If there's a new mandate that's coming, we can put things kind of in warning mode and check to see whether or not people are ready to accept that change before it goes live, and we know what the impact to our pipeline and our customer pipelines are. So we found lots of ways to do analytics and metrics, but we started small with just, hey, how fast are we cranking out the rules? But we have found that not only are the rules of value to have, but looking at the actual execution is of value, to look at that data and see what it tells you about customer behavior or your own business activity.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. I think in the interest of time, we'll forego our last question. We'll do a recap and then move to some of the audience questions. But before we get to the polling question, from my perspective, it sounds like what I hear is you guys are all in. You know, if I'm maybe so bold, the matrix, the types of use cases that you're solving are very wide. I'm also hearing that if we call it the software development lifecycle, the time frame it takes for you to build these rules is you've made very small, and the gaps aren't obvious. You know, we look at requirements, we look at existing logic, and nearly every time you guys seem to explore them with the decision model, you're finding gaps. So a lot of good that can come from just using decision to manage your requirements. One, you've got the documentation actually built as a decision model, but plus all the benefits that come with that. If I could ask you to, and we'll say 2 words, give or take, Megan, how would you summarize your experience?
Oh, well, I think I might be stealing something Stacy said earlier, which was the owning your destiny. So we really found that having decision modeling has allowed us to control, just what we're able to enforce with the business, and having that flexibility and speed to market with changes has just been invaluable at Home Point.
Stacy, assuming she didn't steal your answer, what would your answer be?
Speed with accuracy. It's just finding those exceptions, because our data there's always going to be problems with your data. There's always going to be problems and exceptions that you haven't accounted for, the business didn't envision. And proper development of the rules models really does ensure quality by still supporting, a speed to market, quick return, quick change.
Great. Kristen, you've done a ton over there. How would you summarize it?
I like what Stacy said, but I won't repeat it. I'll go slightly different. I would say it was revolutionary. It really changed how we thought about things. It really shed more light. It gave more transparency, improved speed to market. But once we started doing it, as you said, we find more and more ways to apply it in more and more applications, and it's revolutionized how we manage our policies at Freddie.
Great, thank you. And Ryan?
Yeah, I think I'd have to go with evolving solutions. It feels like it's never the same thing twice with us. We're not always delivering the same type of solution, depending on different constraints that we may have with time or resource availability. We may put in a quick fix versus something we think is gonna, stick for a long time. So we're always looking for different and innovative ways to solve problems.
I appreciate y'all. Let me put you on a spot with that one. Let's advance to the third and final poll question. We'll take a look at that, and then we'll move on to the audience questions. So now that we've learned a little bit about, we've heard some real life examples and the benefits of, could you envision incorporating decision management into your organization? Fingers crossed, I know what the answer is going to be on this one. We'll give it time to play out. It's looking like we've got a winner coming up here. Lots of potential use cases. Okay, great. That's what I was hoping for. I really, it's a silly thing and it's probably overused at this point, but once you're in that matrix, that's all you see is opportunities to use it. Mark, I think you've been kind of curating the questions as they've come in. I don't know if you have any favorites you want to ask
we
the
have some
group
great
here.
questions. great questions from the audience. This one I really like. For someone new to decision modeling, where can I start to understand what it's all about?
Is there? We'll ask Megan. She's
I'll
top
take
center
that.
my camera. Or Stacy, sorry, go ahead if you have an answer.
I would say that you probably already apply it without ever knowing it. If you have a logical approach, you're asking yourselves, if this, then what? You're already doing decision modeling. That would be the quick answer. Where to go? I think there's a couple websites out there that you can do some searching on, but literally you apply it already, you just don't know it until someone shows you a tool.
Okay, another question, I think it's going to be related. How does business rule documentation interact with decision modeling?
So I can try to answer that. It's interesting. We're actually having an interesting discussion here at Freddie Mac. My view is that decision modeling is a methodology for documenting your business rules. What we find is our source documents are all different. Somebody's publishing a spec of here's my required data, here's my conditionally required data. Other people are writing policy statements. You're eligible for this program if blah, 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 blah. And there's no standard way to capture that. And there's all sorts of methodologies out there for those of you who remember object-oriented or use cases, and now we've got user stories. There's no standard way. What decision modeling does is it sit down into these are your conditions and these are your conclusions, and it documents it in a table format that then makes it easy for people to read and easy to automate and easy to look at your test cases. So to me, decision modeling is, there's lots of different ways to do it. I would say decision modeling, while it has a few downsides, it is the best way we found for capturing business rules in an understandable and repeatable fashion so that everybody's on the same page. And all the other methods have their pros and cons, but there's usually ambiguity or confusion. And so if you can, make decision modeling your approach for capturing it.
Okay, someone wrote a comment, and I think it's an interesting comment. It says, everyone wants documentation as long as they don't have to write it. So maybe someone could speak to the power of the decision model.
I guess an example I have is our take on it is the decision model is the documentation. It's clear what you're enforcing through, the examples given. And I can recall we had an audit consulting group come through, and they wanted to hear what our company was doing to enforce our policies. And they met with me and just asked me scenario questions regarding different products that we offer and different scenarios just to see what we could come up with. And I could clearly walk them through and show them exactly what the output would be with the reasoning why it failed or is successful. So I think that's your documentation right there, is the decision model.
I would echo that. And one of the things we debate here at Freddie is, the requirements. And so one of the things we have to remind new analysts is gathering requirements is a process. And if everybody knew what they wanted the first time, that'd be easy. We'd all, we'd marry the first person we dated. You wouldn't make those mistakes, but people don't know what they want until they see it. And so for us, modeling is going into a room and talking with people and throwing some scenarios on the board and have them say, yes, in this scenario, we do this, in this scenario, we do that. And then somebody captures that in a decision model and then shows it back to them. And what we found is you're more likely to figure out what you want with this approach than getting to the end when the system's built and then everybody shakes their head and goes, that's not what I expected, that's not what I wanted. So I agree, it's painful, but it's the least painful of the other options out there, use case, object-oriented approaches. This helps you see, given this input, what do I want to have happen? And then everybody can agree that that's the right outcome.
Okay. A question from our audience. What's been the most interesting problem you've solved with decision modeling?
if I have to reach back in time, for me, it was kind of corresponds with one of Megan's stories regarding mortgage insurance, because the pain of disclosing incorrectly is very costly. But the amount of logic that we wrapped around the mortgage insurance in terms of do they need it? Do they have it? Is it entered correctly? Do they need to get it again because something has changed? Have we disclosed since? Do we need to disclose again? It was a pretty significant collection of logic that ultimately eliminated our mortgage insurance costly problem mistakes that were happening.
Okay.
I was going to joke and say, I don't want to offend any of our business partners. So probably the most interesting is we do decision modeling challenges, and we got a group of people to model out what you do to prevent a werewolf attack. So we came up with some funny, silly ones to address.
Your answer was better. I like the werewolf attack.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question, Justin?
I think so.
Okay. How do you go about training people for decision modeling?
I'd like to take that one if you don't mind. And I hate to be that salesperson, but I'm going to do it. We had a team that was not super familiar with rules. We were business people. We had a technical understanding of the data and the business and all this other stuff, but we didn't really understand modeling. The trainers were awesome. Sapiens specifically was just amazing at coming in, having a very structured training and interactive learning capability with that. And I don't mean to be a salesman, but it was just the training that was offered specifically for the Sapiens tool was tremendous. And I would dare say that I've not had that experience with other vendor products.
Well, thank you. Mark, I think we're probably at our time.
Can I build
so
on
first,
that really?
please go ahead.
We started off with Sapiens training us, but just for others, in case they're worried that they don't have a budget to keep bringing people back, we started with that training, and I would agree it was invaluable. Now we think of training as you've got to do some practice, and so we go through some decks, we give out some use cases, but we find that people learn by doing, and so we've got sort of a program that we've developed in-house to give people some samples and then do that, but it was all based off that initial getting a large enough group trained. Oh, sorry.
No, it's great. It's always empower the business to handle it, and that's what I'm hearing. So certainly, thank you, panelists, for spending the time answering our questions. Thank you to the audience for participating. I hope everyone found this valuable.
Thanks, Justin and Mark, and thanks to all of our panelists for that great session today. We'd also like to thank Sapiens Decision for sponsoring today's event. We'd all like to thank everyone for attending today's Modern Analyst webinar, and I'd like to remind everyone that today's webinar will be archived at the ModernAnalyst.com website within a few business days. This concludes today's event, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you.